I built that company from nothing. Not from the bottom, from below the bottom. I was 19 years old carrying boxes into a rented storage unit that my dad called our first office. Concrete floor, one folding table, a Wi-Fi hotspot duct taped to the wall. That was it. That was the whole operation. Dad had the idea. I had the spreadsheets, the supplier calls, the 2 a.m. emails, the everything. He'd pat me on the shoulder every Friday and say the same thing. This wouldn't exist without you, Sarah. I believed him. I believed him for 9 years. 9 years of skipped vacations, 9 years of answering client calls during family dinners, 9 years of building something that had my fingerprints on every single wall. And then one Tuesday morning, I walked into the office and my key card didn't work. I tried it twice, 3 times. I stood there in the parking lot like an idiot, in the rain, with my laptop bag sliding off my shoulder, swiping a key card that no longer recognized me. The security panel beeped. Then a voice came through. The building's automated system. Cold, flat, robotic. Access denied. Authorization updated. Contact administrator. The administrator was my brother, Derek, 26 years old. Derek, who had never once stepped inside this building for a full workday. Derek, who called me 2 weeks ago asking what accounts receivable meant. My dad had handed him my office, my title, my clients, my parking spot, and nobody told me. Not a call, not a text, not even an email. I found out from a robot. If you've ever poured your soul into something and watched someone hand it to a person who didn't even want it, stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. And I have the emails, the security logs, and the board meeting recording to prove every single word. Welcome to Hidden Family Betrayal. I'm Sarah, 34, and for 9 years I ran my father's logistics company out of a city in North Carolina. This is the story of what I found, what I did, and why the security system ended up being the most honest thing in that entire building. Let me take you back 6 months before that parking lot moment, because betrayal doesn't happen overnight. It gets built slowly, quietly, right behind your back, while you're busy working. Our company was called Hartwell Logistics. My dad, Robert, started it when I was 10 years old. A small freight coordination business in Greensboro, North Carolina. 3 employees, 1 van, and a dream that was bigger than our bank account. By the time I was 19, Dad was burned out. The business was drowning, clients were leaving, invoices weren't getting paid. He sat me down at our kitchen table one night and slid a notepad across to me. I need your help, Sarah. I don't know how to fix this. So I fixed it. I taught myself logistics software at midnight. I cold called suppliers who'd stopped returning Dad's calls. I restructured our pricing model, hired 2 new drivers, and landed a contract with a regional grocery chain that tripled our monthly revenue in 8 months. Dad cried at the kitchen table when I showed him the numbers. You saved this family, he said, and I didn't do it for a title. I didn't do it for money. I did it because it was ours, because I thought that meant something. Here's what I didn't know. While I was landing contracts and managing drivers and answering emails at midnight, my dad was having a completely different conversation with my brother Derek. Derek, who had spent his 20s moving between jobs, sales associate, gym trainer, 1 failed dropshipping store that lasted 4 months. Derek, who was charming and loud and walked into every room like he already owned it. Dad saw himself in Derek. He never saw himself in me. I found out about the conversation by accident, and I mean complete accident. Our office had a shared server, documents, contracts, client files, everything lived on it. I was pulling a vendor agreement on a Wednesday afternoon when I saw a folder I'd never noticed before. It was labeled simply, Transition Plan. Something in my stomach dropped before I even clicked it. Inside was a 14-page document, dated 3 months ago, written by my father, reviewed by a business attorney I'd never heard of, and addressed to Derek Robert Calloway. Subject, Ownership Transition and Leadership Restructuring, Hartwell Logistics. I sat at my desk and read every single page. My role, Operations Director, the title I'd held for 6 years, was being eliminated, replaced by a new position called Senior Advisor. No decision-making authority, no client access, no voting rights. Derek would become CEO, effective in 60 days. The document was already signed. My father had signed it 3 months ago, and for 3 months he had looked me in the eye every single morning, handed me coffee, asked about client updates, and said absolutely nothing. I closed the folder, closed my laptop, walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the floor for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because my phone screen kept lighting up with Slack notifications from the team I was supposed to be managing. The team that was about to be managed by someone who didn't know what accounts receivable meant. When I stood up, something had shifted. Not broken, shifted, like a door locking from the inside. I went back to my desk, reopened the folder, And this time I didn't just read it. I printed it. Every page. Folded it. Put it in my bag. And then I went back to work like nothing had happened. Because that's what you do when you're the one who actually keeps things running. Here's something nobody tells you about being betrayed by your own father. The hardest part isn't the anger. The hardest part is sitting across from him at lunch the next day, watching him ask you to pass the salt, and realizing he has absolutely no idea that you know. That was me. Every single day for the next 2 weeks. I showed up at 8 a.m. like always. I answered emails. I ran the Monday morning operations meeting. I approved driver schedules and handled a client complaint about a delayed shipment to Charlotte. I did my job perfectly, and every night I went home and opened a plain black notebook I'd bought from a gas station on my way back from the office. I wrote down everything. Not emotionally, not as a daughter who was hurt, as an employee protecting herself, dates, times, conversations, decisions, every meeting my dad had with Derek that I wasn't invited to, every time a client file was accessed by an account that wasn't mine or Dad's, every small shift in how people spoke to me in the hallway, because here's what I'd learned from 9 years of running operations. Patterns don't lie, people do. By day 4 of my quiet investigation, I had already found the first real problem. It wasn't in the transition document. It was underneath it. Our company had 3 major client contracts. Each one had been negotiated and maintained by me personally. Henderson Grocery, Triad Medical Supply, and a regional furniture chain called Carver Home. Together, those 3 contracts represented 71% of Hartwell's monthly revenue. I pulled the contract files on a Thursday evening after everyone had left. Henderson Grocery, renewal clause active. My signature on the original, no changes. Triad Medical Supply, same, clean. Carver Home, different. The Carver Home contract had been amended, quietly, 6 weeks ago. The amendment removed my name as primary relationship manager and replaced it with Derek's. Derek, who had never once spoken to anyone at Carver Home. Derek, who didn't even know what we shipped for them. I sat at my desk in an empty office under the hum of fluorescent lights and read that amendment 4 times. Then I checked the authorization signature. It was my father's, and next to his, a second signature I didn't recognize. A man named Gerald Pitt, listed as incoming board advisor. I typed Gerald Pitt into LinkedIn. His most recent position before this one, director of operations at a logistics firm in Atlanta that had gone bankrupt 18 months ago. A firm that had lost 3 of its biggest clients in its final year. Those clients? Henderson Grocery, Triad Medical Supply, Carver Home. Stop right there. Because I need you to understand what I was looking at. My father wasn't just handing the company to Derek, he was bringing in an outside advisor who had already failed with our exact same clients at a different company. And nobody, not Derek, not Dad, not Gerald Pitt, had mentioned a single word of this to me. The person who managed those relationships for 6 years. The person those clients called by first name. The person who had kept Henderson Grocery from walking out the door 18 months ago with a single phone call and a revised delivery schedule. Me. I closed the contract files, logged out, picked up my gas station notebook, and wrote down 2 words at the top of a fresh page. Gerald Pitt. I drove home that night through downtown Greensboro with the windows down. It was late April, that specific kind of spring evening where the air is warm but still carries something cool underneath it. I thought about calling my mom. My parents had been divorced since I was 15. Mom lived in Raleigh, 2 hours east. She'd always been honest with me in a way that my dad was careful not to be. I didn't call her, not yet. I wasn't ready to say it out loud, because saying it out loud would make it real. And I still had work to do before real. I needed one more thing before I made any move. I needed to know if Derek actually wanted this, or if he was just the face on a plan that someone else had built entirely without him. I want to be honest about Derek for a second, because it would be easy to make him the villain of this story. He's younger. He's never worked hard a day in his life. He waltzed in and got handed something that took me 9 years to build. Easy villain. Simple story. But the truth is more complicated than that. And the truth always matters more than the easy version. Derek and I were never close. 4 years between us felt like 40 sometimes. He was the loud one at family dinners. I was the one clearing plates before anyone finished eating. He told jokes. I made spreadsheets. Dad laughed at his jokes and nodded at my spreadsheets. We weren't enemies. We were just strangers who happened to share a last name. So on a Friday afternoon, I did something that surprised even me. I texted him, "Hey, you free this weekend? Want to grab coffee? Just us." He replied in 4 minutes, which told me something immediately. "Yeah, actually. Been meaning to talk to you too." We met Sunday morning at a diner on Elm Street. Booths with red vinyl seats. Coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since Thursday. Derek was already there when I arrived, which was the first time in my memory that he'd been early to anything. He looked uncomfortable, not guilty, uncomfortable, like a person sitting in a waiting room for an appointment they didn't schedule themselves. I sat down, ordered coffee, and waited. He spoke first. "Dad told you, right?" I wrapped both hands around my mug. "Dad hasn't told me anything, Derek." His face did something complicated, surprise, then something that looked almost like shame. "Sarah, he said he was going to sit down with you, weeks ago. He promised me he'd talk to you already." He hasn't said a single word. Derek put his elbows on the table and pressed both hands over his face. Sat like that for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were tired in a way I hadn't noticed when I walked in. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "I want you to know that. He called me in January and said he wanted to step back and needed someone to take over. I told him you should do it. I told him that 3 times. I looked at him across the red vinyl booth and the bad coffee and the 4 years of distance between us. What did he say?" Derek's jaw tightened. "He said you were too emotionally attached to the business to make the hard decisions." Too emotionally attached. I had restructured a drowning company at 19 years old. I had managed 31 employees, 3 major contracts, and a fleet of 12 vehicles. I had answered calls on Christmas morning because a client shipment was delayed. Too emotionally attached. I didn't say any of that out loud. I just nodded slowly and set my coffee mug down. "Did he tell you about Gerald Pitt?" I asked. Derek frowned. "The board advisor? Yeah. Dad said he has industry experience." "Did he tell you which industry?" "Logistics," I figured. "Did he tell you that Gerald Pitt ran a logistics firm in Atlanta that went bankrupt? And that his 3 biggest clients before bankruptcy were Henderson, Triad, and Carver Home? Our 3 biggest clients?" The color left Derek's face slowly, like water draining from a glass. "No," he said quietly. "He did not tell me that." Here's where I have to pause, because what happened next wasn't something I planned. Derek pulled out his own phone and opened his email, scrolled, stopped. "Sarah, look at this." He slid the phone across the table. It was an email from Gerald Pitt to my father, dated 5 weeks ago. The subject line was, Phase 2, Client Migration. I read it once, then again, then a third time to make sure I was understanding what I was actually reading. Gerald Pitt wasn't just joining Hartwell Logistics as a board advisor. He was proposing to transfer our 3 major client contracts to a new entity, a separate LLC formed 2 months ago, registered in Delaware. The LLC had 2 listed members, Robert Calloway, my father, and Gerald Pitt. Derek's name was nowhere in that email. My name was nowhere in that email. Hartwell Logistics, the company I had rebuilt from nothing, was going to be quietly hollowed out. The best clients moved to a new company that my father and a failed outside advisor were building together. Derek wasn't getting the company. He was getting the empty shell of it. And I wasn't getting anything at all. We sat in that diner for another hour. 2 siblings who had spent years being strangers, reading an email that changed everything we thought we understood about our own father. Derek kept saying, "I didn't know," and I kept believing him more each time, because the look on his face wasn't the look of someone caught. It was the look of someone who had just realized they were never the plan. They were the distraction. I took a photo of that email before I handed his phone back. Then I opened my gas station notebook to a fresh page. At the top I wrote, Phase 2. Underneath it, I wrote the name of the Delaware LLC. Then I went home and called a lawyer. "I want to tell you something about asking for help. I had spent 9 years being the person everyone else came to. Drivers called me when routes changed. Clients called me when shipments were late. Dad called me when the QuickBooks numbers didn't make sense. Even Derek called me that one time his apartment lease had confusing language in it. I was always the one with answers. So walking into a lawyer's office and saying I need help was one of the hardest things I had ever done. Her name was Patricia Holloway. Employment and business law. Office on Green Street in downtown Greensboro. 3rd floor of a brick building that used to be a textile warehouse. She had a degrees wall that took up an entire side of the room and a legal pad that she filled faster than anyone I'd ever watched take notes. I brought everything. The transition document, the Carver Home contract amendment, the Gerald Pitt email on my phone, my gas station notebook with 2 weeks of documented observations, and every performance review, email thread, and client communication that had my name on it going back 6 years. Patricia read through everything without speaking for 22 minutes. I counted. When she looked up, she took her glasses off and set them on the desk. "How long did you say you've been running operations?" 9 years, officially operations director for 6. "And you have no equity in the company?" No ownership stake? I shook my head. Dad always said we'd formalize it when the time was right. She wrote something on her legal pad. The time was apparently right for someone else. Patricia walked me through the legal landscape slowly and clearly. As a non-owner employee, my position wasn't protected the way a partner's would be. North Carolina is an at-will employment state. Dad could eliminate my role legally. That part I already knew. But here's what I didn't know. The Delaware LLC that Gerald Pitt and my father had formed, Patricia pulled it up in the state business registry while I sat across from her. Took her 4 minutes. The LLC was called Hartwell Supply Solutions, formed 8 weeks ago, and listed in the registered documents as its primary business purpose: freight coordination and client logistics management serving the greater Southeast region. Identical language to Hartwell Logistics' own operating agreement. Patricia set her pen down. If your father uses his position as owner to direct company clients toward a separate entity he personally benefits from without disclosing that conflict of interest to the company or its stakeholders, that's not restructuring. That's a breach of fiduciary duty. She paused. Do any of your client contracts have exclusivity clauses? I pulled out the Henderson grocery contract from my folder. She found the clause in under a minute. Section 7.4, Exclusivity and Non-Compete. Henderson Grocery's agreement with Hartwell Logistics included a clause preventing either party from engaging a competing logistics provider for the contract's service region during the active term. If my father moved Henderson to Hartwell Supply Solutions while their contract with Hartwell Logistics was still active, he'd be in breach, and Henderson's legal team would have grounds to walk away from both companies entirely. Patricia looked at me over her legal pad. Does your father know about this clause? He was in the room when I negotiated it, I said. She wrote 3 words on her pad, underlined them twice, and turned it around so I could read them. He forgot you. I drove back to the office after that meeting and sat in the parking lot for a long time. Not because I was falling apart, because I was thinking. Patricia had given me options. I could file a wrongful termination claim preemptively. I could report the LLC conflict to the company's registered agent. I could contact Henderson Grocery's legal team directly and flag the exclusivity clause before my father made his move. All of those were valid. All of those were loud. And something in me, the part that had spent 9 years keeping things running quietly, said not yet. Not yet. Because loud moves made from a place of hurt get dismissed as emotional reactions. And my father had already told Derek I was too emotionally attached to make hard decisions. I wasn't going to prove him right. I was going to prove him wrong in a way he would never see coming. I needed one more thing first. The one piece of evidence I didn't have yet. I needed to know if any trust funds, retirement accounts, or personal savings that my father held jointly with other family members, including me, had been used to seed that Delaware LLC. Because if they had, that wasn't just a business dispute anymore. That was something else entirely. I texted Patricia from the parking lot. How do I find out where the LLC startup capital came from? She replied in 6 minutes. Financial disclosure request. I'll file it Monday. And Sarah, start backing up everything on that company server tonight. I looked up at the Hartwell Logistics sign above the entrance. My father's name on the building, my work inside every wall. I went in, sat at my desk, and started backing up 9 years of files onto a hard drive I'd bought on my lunch break. It took 4 hours. Nobody noticed, because nobody ever noticed how long I stayed. The financial disclosure came back on a Thursday. Patricia called me at 8:47 a.m. while I was sitting at my desk pretending to review a driver schedule. Her voice was measured. Careful, the way doctors sound when they're delivering news they've already processed, so you don't have to watch them react. Sarah, the startup capital for Hartwell Supply Solutions, the Delaware LLC. We have the source. I put my pen down. Okay. $70,000, wired 8 weeks ago from a joint savings account. Joint between my father and Gerald Pitt? Silence for exactly 2 seconds. Joint between your father and you. I need you to understand something. When I was 23 years old, my father sat me down and told me he wanted to open a joint savings account. A business continuity fund, he called it, in case of emergency, in case the company ever needed a fast cash injection and the business account was tied up. He said he was putting me on it because he trusted me more than anyone. I had deposited money into that account myself, not a lot, but some. A few thousand over the years during good quarters when I thought we were building something together. $70,000. Gone. Used to start a competing company, with my name on the source account. I sat at my desk inside Hartwell Logistics, surrounded by 9 years of my own work, and understood something completely and quietly. My father hadn't just pushed me out, he had used me to fund his exit. I left the office at noon and told the front desk I had a client lunch. I drove to Derek's apartment on the north side of Greensboro. Didn't call ahead, just knocked. He opened the door in a t-shirt and gym shorts, coffee in hand, clearly not expecting anyone. He took one look at my face. "Come in," he said. I sat on his couch and told him everything. The LLC, Gerald Pitt, the exclusivity clause in the Henderson contract, Patricia's findings, the joint savings account. Derek sat across from me in a chair that was too small for him and didn't say a single word until I finished. Then he put his coffee mug on the floor, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and said, "He used your account?" $70,000. Derek stood up, walked to the window, stood there looking at the parking lot below for a long moment. When he turned around, his face had changed completely. "What do you need from me?" And just like that, without ceremony, without a long dramatic speech, my brother and I became something we had never been before. A team, not because we suddenly had years of closeness to draw from. We didn't. We were still two people who barely knew each other's daily lives, but we had the same father, and we had both just realized that the man we thought we knew had been running a completely different story underneath the one he showed us. Derek had one thing I needed: access. Because while my keycard had already been quietly downgraded in the system, I checked and confirmed it that afternoon. Derek's access had been upgraded. CEO transition, the system showed. Full building and server permissions. He hadn't asked for that access. Dad had given it to him to make the transition look legitimate. And Derek was about to use it in a way our father never intended. Here's what we did. Derek requested a formal meeting with our father. Nothing unusual. Son wanting to discuss transition timeline with Dad. Dad agreed immediately, scheduled it for the following Tuesday at 10 a.m. in the main conference room. What Dad didn't know was that the conference room had been upgraded with a new integrated security and recording system 8 months ago. I had approved that upgrade myself. I had also set the default recording settings. Every scheduled meeting in that room was automatically logged to the company server. Audio and video, stored for 90 days. Derek walked into that Tuesday meeting with a legal pad, a pen, and 7 specific questions that Patricia and I had spent the entire weekend preparing. I sat in my car in the parking lot with my laptop open, connected to the company server through my remote access credentials that hadn't been revoked yet because nobody had thought to check, and I watched. Dad walked in looking relaxed, comfortable, the way a person looks when they believe they are completely in control of a situation. He poured himself a coffee from the credenza, sat down, smiled at Derek. "Good to do this officially, son." Derek smiled back. "Yeah, I have some questions about the transition. Just want to make sure I understand everything clearly before I sign anything." Dad nodded, generous, patient. "Of course, ask me anything." Derek opened his legal pad. "Tell me about Hartwell Supply Solutions." The smile didn't leave my father's face immediately. It took about 4 seconds. 4 seconds of pure silence in that conference room while my father's brain caught up with what his ears had just heard. Then the smile faded, slowly, completely, like a light being turned down on a dimmer switch. "Where did you hear that name?" "Is it relevant where I heard it?" Derek said quietly. "I just want to understand. Is Hartwell Supply Solutions related to this transition?" Dad shifted in his chair. "That's a separate business matter, not relevant to your role here." "It's registered with our same client base and service region," Derek said, still calm, still quiet. "And it was funded from Sarah's joint savings account." 4 more seconds of silence. My father looked at the table, and in 9 years of watching Robert Calloway run a business, charm clients, and talk his way out of every difficult conversation, I had never once seen him look at a table. He always looked people in the eye, always, until now. I sat in the parking lot with my hand over my mouth, not crying, just still. Watching my father on a laptop screen in a company car in a parking lot of a building that had my fingerprints on every wall. Derek let the silence sit for a long moment. Then he said the 7 words we had agreed on the night before. "Dad, Sarah knows everything. What do we do?" My father sat in that conference room for 43 seconds without speaking. I know because I counted. Sitting in that parking lot, laptop open, watching a security feed of my own father process the fact that the plan he had spent months building in secret had just been walked into the light by the one person he thought he'd successfully distracted. 43 seconds is a long time when nobody is talking. It's long enough to hear the air conditioning cycling, long enough to watch someone's hands move from the table to their lap, long enough to see a person decide who they're going to be in the next moment. My father looked up at Derek, and the first thing he said wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was a question. How much does she know? Derek didn't flinch. We had prepared for this exact response. Patricia had actually predicted it word for word during our Sunday night call. She'll likely ask how much you know, Patricia had said. People protecting a plan always want to know how much of it has been exposed before they decide what to admit. Derek set his legal pad down flat on the table. She knows about the LLC. She knows about Gerald Pitt. She knows about the Henderson exclusivity clause. She knows about the joint account. He paused. She knows everything, Dad. My father closed his eyes, pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose the way he always did when a client call went badly. I had watched him do that exact gesture 100 times from the doorway of his office. It used to mean the situation was difficult. Right now it meant the situation was over. What came next surprised me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. My father didn't rage, didn't deny, didn't flip the table or storm out or threaten lawyers the way Ray had done in the story I'd read once about a family trust in Virginia. He just deflated, like a person who had been holding their breath for 8 weeks and finally couldn't anymore. I was going to tell her, he said quietly. When? Derek asked. After the transition was settled, after everything was in place. I didn't want her to. I knew she'd fight it. She fights everything. Derek's voice was steady. She fights everything because she built everything, Dad. Silence. Gerald approached me, my father said, still looking at the table. 2 years ago. Said he had relationships with our client base from his Atlanta operation. Said we could scale faster with outside partnership. I thought it made sense to bring in someone with broader experience. Broader experience, Derek repeated slowly. The man ran a company into bankruptcy with our exact clients. I didn't know the full picture when I agreed. And when you found out? Longer silence this time. The LLC was already formed, the money was already moved. I thought if I could make it work, nobody would need to know the rough start. Derek leaned forward. You used Sarah's account, Dad. My father finally looked up, and the expression on his face through that laptop screen. I want to be careful about how I describe this because I don't want to be unfair. It wasn't cold. It wasn't calculated. It looked like a man seeing the full weight of something for the first time. Not because he hadn't known what he'd done, but because hearing it said plainly by his own son made it real in a way that paperwork and planning never had. I know, he said. 2 words. The same 2 words my mother had sent on my birthday in that other story. Except these 2 words carried something different underneath them. These carried something that sounded quietly, imperfectly, insufficiently, like the beginning of understanding. Derek called me from the parking lot 20 minutes later. I was still in my car. Hadn't moved. You heard all of it? Every word, I said. What do you want to do? I looked up at the Hartwell Logistics sign above the entrance. 9 years of my life behind those doors. My name nowhere on the building. My fingerprints on everything inside it. I want to come inside, I said. I walked into that conference room still in my coat. My father was sitting exactly where Derek had left him. Coffee untouched, legal pad still blank in front of him. He looked up when I walked in, and for the first time in 9 years, maybe longer, he didn't look like my boss. He looked like my dad, older than I remembered somehow, smaller in the chair. I sat down across from him, not next to him, across. Derek stood by the window with his arms crossed, present, quiet, exactly where I needed him. I put Patricia's folder on the table between us, didn't open it, just let it sit there. I'm not here to destroy anything, I said. I built this company and I don't want to watch it fall apart, but I need you to understand what you did. Dad nodded, said nothing. You told Derek I was too emotionally attached to make hard decisions, and then you used my savings account, without asking me, to fund a competing business, with a man who already failed with our clients once. I kept my voice flat, steady, the way I read numbers at work. That wasn't a business decision, Dad. That was you deciding my judgment didn't matter, and then using my own money to prove it. He opened his mouth, closed it. The Henderson exclusivity clause, I continued. If Gerald Pitt had moved that contract to Hartwell Supply Solutions while our agreement was still active, Henderson's legal team would have walked. Not just from the LLC, from us, from Hartwell Logistics entirely. We would have lost 31% of our monthly revenue overnight. Dad's jaw tightened. I didn't think they'd... I know you didn't think, I said quietly. That's the problem. The room was completely still. Outside the conference room window, I could see the parking lot. My car. The place where I'd sat for the past hour watching everything I'd built almost get taken apart by people who thought I wouldn't notice. I have 3 options on this table, I said. Patricia outlined all of them. Legal action for unauthorized use of joint funds, reporting the LLC conflict of interest to Henderson and Triad directly, or restructuring. I finally opened the folder, slid the first page across to him. I'm choosing restructuring, because I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because someone has to protect what Grandma would have called the column C. Dad looked down at the page. His eyes moved slowly across the terms. When he looked up, there was something in his face I hadn't seen directed at me in a very long time. Respect. Not the comfortable, taken-for-granted kind he showed when I fixed a client problem. The kind that costs something to give. "What do you need from me?" he said. And just like that, in a conference room that smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner, with my brother standing by the window and 9 years of my work in a folder between us, everything shifted. The restructuring terms were 4 pages long. Patricia had drafted them over a weekend, with the kind of precision that makes you grateful some people chose law school instead of whatever easier thing they could have done with that brain. I slid the document across the conference table to my father. He read every page. No interruptions, no pushback, no warm casual laugh designed to diffuse tension the way Gerald Pitt probably used in every difficult meeting he'd ever walked out of without consequence. My father read 4 pages of legal terms written by a woman he'd never met, drafted to protect a daughter he'd spent months overlooking. And when he finished, he set the papers down and picked up a pen. "Where do I sign?" But let me tell you what those 4 pages actually said, because this part matters. Term 1. Hartwell Supply Solutions, the Delaware LLC, would be formally dissolved within 30 days. Gerald Pitt's consulting agreement, which had never been disclosed to the company or its clients, would be terminated immediately with no severance. Patricia had included a clause requiring written confirmation of dissolution filed with the Delaware Secretary of State, verified, documented, permanent. Term 2. The joint savings account would be restored. $70,000 returned from my father's personal funds within 60 days. A repayment schedule signed and notarized. Not a promise over coffee. A legal obligation with Patricia's firm listed as oversight. Term 3. My role at Hartwell Logistics would be formally restructured. Not eliminated. Not quietly downgraded to senior advisor with no authority. Restructured upward. Effective immediately, I would become co-director of operations and equity partner. 10% ownership stake. Vesting over 3 years with immediate partial rights. My name, on the company, legally. Finally. Term 4. Derek would remain involved, not as CEO, not as a figurehead dropped into a role he never asked for. As business development director. A real role built around what he was actually good at. Relationships, outreach, walking into rooms and making people feel comfortable. Turned out Derek was genuinely good at that. Turns out my father had just been pointing that skill at the wrong door. Gerald Pitt called my father the following Monday morning. I know because Dad told me himself that evening. Gerald had heard through whatever network failed logistics advisors apparently share that the LLC was being dissolved. He called to negotiate, to threaten, to remind my father of what he'd promised. My father told him the agreement was over. Gerald mentioned lawyers. My father mentioned Patricia Holloway and the Henderson exclusivity clause and the forensic paper trail of an unauthorized LLC funded from a joint account without co-holder consent. Gerald Pitt did not call back. Some people only have power when nobody reads the fine print. The moment someone does, they disappear. The morning my new title was officially entered into the company records, I arrived at the office at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before anyone else. I stood in the parking lot for a moment. Same parking lot where 3 weeks ago I had stood in the rain swiping a key card that no longer recognized me. Same building, same sign above the entrance. I held up my new key card. The security panel beeped once. Access granted. Good morning, Sarah. I stood there for probably 10 seconds longer than necessary. Not because I was being dramatic, but because sometimes the smallest thing carries the full weight of everything that came before it. A door opening that was closed to you. A system that recognizes your name. A robot being more honest than the people inside the building. I walked in. The first thing I did that morning wasn't send emails or review contracts or call a client. I went to my office, my actual office, the one with my name on the door now, printed on a small placard that facilities had installed the day before, and I sat down, opened my desk drawer, pulled out the gas station notebook, the plain black one I'd bought 3 weeks ago on my way home from a day I didn't fully understand yet. I flipped to the first page. Dates, times, patterns don't lie, people do. I flipped to the last page with writing on it. Gerald Pitt, Phase 2, Delaware LLC. I closed it, put it in the drawer, kept it. Because documentation isn't just for disputes, it's for memory. So that on the days when you start to doubt yourself, when you start to wonder if maybe you were too sensitive, too attached, too much, you can open a plain black notebook and read your own handwriting and remember exactly what you knew and when you knew it. Derek knocked on my office door that afternoon, leaned against the frame with his coffee the way he'd leaned against his apartment doorframe 3 weeks ago when I showed up unannounced. "How's it feel?" he said. I looked around the office, the desk I'd been sitting at for 6 years, the window facing the parking lot, the small placard next to the door with my name on it. "Quiet," I said. "Good quiet." He nodded, started to leave. "Derek," he turned. "I'm glad you showed me that email." He was quiet for a second. "I'm glad you texted me for coffee," he said. And that was enough. 4 years of distance doesn't disappear over one diner booth and a crisis, but it starts somewhere. It starts with two people deciding that the thing trying to divide them isn't worth more than the thing they could build together. We weren't suddenly close, but we were something we hadn't been before, honest with each other. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. My father and I didn't have a dramatic reconciliation scene. I want to be honest about that because I think you deserve the real version and not the version that wraps up cleanly in a single conversation. We talked. More than we had in years. Slowly, carefully. The way you talk to someone when you're rebuilding something that got damaged, not pretending the damage wasn't there but not letting it be the only thing you talk about either. He told me that Gerald Pitt had approached him during a period when he felt invisible in his own company, when he watched me handle everything so efficiently that he started to feel like a signature on documents someone else had already decided. I understood that more than I wanted to, because I knew exactly what it felt like to be the person in the room that everyone looks through. "You could have just talked to me," I said. "I know," he said. "We're going to have to get better at that." "I know," he said again. 2 words, but different ones this time. These ones meant, "I'm going to try." 3 months later, Hartwell Logistics renewed the Henderson grocery contract. I sat across the table from their procurement director, a woman named Claudia, who had been my contact for 4 years, and walked her through our new operational structure, new equity partnership, enhanced oversight protocols, independent annual audits. Claudia looked at the documents, looked at me, and said something I wasn't expecting. "We heard there were some internal changes. We were worried for a minute." "So was I said honestly. She smiled. Signed the renewal. 3-year term. Largest contract value in Hartwell's history. I drove back to the office with the signed papers on the passenger seat and called Patricia from the parking lot. "Henderson renewed," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Congratulations, Sarah." "Thank you for everything." "Thank yourself," she said. "You came in with a gas station notebook and a folder full of evidence. I just wrote the letters. I want to leave you with one thing, not advice, not a lesson, just something true. There is a specific kind of person in every family, every company, every room. The person who shows up before anyone else and leaves after everyone's gone. The person who learns the software, makes the calls, fixes the problems, and never once asks for applause because they're too busy making sure the lights stay on. That person is usually the last one anyone thinks to protect, and the first one everyone calls when something breaks. If you are that person, I need you to hear this. Read the documents. Know your rights. Build your paper trail, not because you're planning a war, but because you deserve to know exactly what you're standing on. The people who dismiss you as too emotional, too attached, too much, they are counting on you not knowing your own value clearly enough to defend it. Know it clearly. The security system in our conference room recorded everything. The honest thing in that building turned out to be a piece of technology that had no reason to lie. Sometimes the most important witness in your story isn't a person. It's the record you kept when nobody was watching. Keep the record. Show up. Your name belongs on the door.